Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to dismantle a very comforting but, well, very persistent illusion. The idea that you are always in conscious control of your own actions. I mean, we all walk around feeling entirely rational, right? We're convinced that we understand exactly why we do the things we do, even if that thing is, eating an entire sleep of cookies at midnight. But what if the science of human behavior tells a completely different story? What if there's this hidden rule book running quietly in the background of your mind? Let's take a closer look at what psychology actually reveals about the invisible forces pulling our strings.
Okay, let's dive into this by tackling the really uncomfortable question at the center of all this. Are you actually steering your own thinking? Now, common sense tells you that of course you are. You weigh the options, you make a conscious choice, and then you act. Simple, right? But behavioral science completely flips this script. You are not the captain of the ship. Actually, in many ways, you're just a passenger watching the scenery go by, entirely convinced you're the one turning the wheel. Consider some truly unsettling research published back in 2016. It revealed that our conscious mind is often the absolute last to know what our brain has already decided. Yep, you heard that right. Research has found that social behavior begins as this coordinated pattern of activity spread across the brain literally seconds before you even realize you've made a choice. Think about what that actually means. Cognitive biases are operating completely on autopilot. We aren't actively steering our thoughts. We're mostly just watching the results of brain processes that finished long before we were even aware of them. Crazy, isn't it? Now, what's really interesting about this is how we constantly misunderstand our own competence. And pop psychology often makes it so much worse. You've probably heard the phrase, stupid people think they're geniuses, right? That stems from a famous 1999 study on incompetence and self-assessment, widely known as the Dunning-Kruger Effect. But that misses half the story. Yes, it's absolutely true that people with the weakest skills dramatically overestimate their performance, but the original research also found that highly skilled people consistently underestimate their own abilities. They just assume that tasks that are easy for them must be easy for everyone else. So competence itself comes with this massive blind spot. The least qualified are just bursting with confidence, while the most qualified quietly assume they're nothing special.
And this blind spot, it extends to our motivations too, and it usually follows this rather painful three-step trajectory. First, you absolutely love a hobby. Second, you start getting paid to do it. And third, you completely lose the joy of the task. This right here is a classic example of cognitive dissonance, specifically something called the over-justification effect. It's like the very moment you pay someone to do something they already love, their brain steps in and says, wait a minute, I'm only doing this for the money now. And boom, their intrinsic motivation just evaporates. Turning your passion into your paycheck often ends up, well, killing the passion entirely.
So why does this happen? Well, it's based on a fascinating rule. We human beings cannot easily hold two contradictory beliefs at the exact same time. When we're forced to, we quietly rewrite one of them, usually without even noticing we're doing it. Rather than change our behavior, we just rationalize our choices. We literally adjust our own memories to fit our current self-image. Because at our core, we are storytellers. We are constantly rewriting the script to make sure we remain the rational, flawless heroes of our own lives. And the thing is, we don't just do this to ourselves, we do it to everyone around us. Which brings us to the halo effect. This is what happens when we perceive someone positively in just one dimension. Say they have great physical appearance, or they just exude confidence, and we automatically assume they are highly competent, highly intelligent, and highly moral in completely unrelated areas. Nobody feels this cognitive bias kick in. It just happens. It's completely automatic, operating entirely below the level of conscious thought.
And this brilliantly illustrates that the halo effect isn't just some quirky little brain glitch. It shapes our society in terrifying, automated ways. This invisible bias literally dictates who gets hired for a job, who a jury convicts in court, who we trust with our medical care, and who we choose to follow in leadership. It alters life-altering outcomes based on factors like, a nice smile or a confident posture that have absolutely nothing to do with actual ability or character.
Now, if you're sitting there thinking you're immune to these social pressures, consider one of the most famous and, honestly, disturbing experiments in the history of psychology. Back in 1963, Stanley Milgram wanted to study obedience to authority, and what he found was just staggering. Participants believed they were administering electric shocks to another person in the next room. And even as they heard screams of pain, a substantial portion of regular, everyday Americans continued increasing the voltage to potentially lethal levels. Why? Simply because a calm researcher in a white lab coat politely told them to continue. The shocks were fake, but that terrifying obedience, that was very, very real. So the crucial point is that all of this points to one deeply uncomfortable conclusion. Harmful behavior is much more the result of situational factors than individual character. It is far more accurate to talk about environmental conditions that produce harmful behavior than to talk about inherently bad people. The deeply unsettling truth of the Milgram experiment is that most people, if placed in the exact right circumstances, are fully capable of doing things they would have absolutely never predicted of themselves. And this overwhelming power of our environment, it scales up from individual actions to massive societal phenomena. Take the spread of misinformation, for example. It's so easy to assume people share fake news out of malice, but in reality, it's just a mismatch of priorities. Human beings are hardwired to crave the immediate social reward of engagement, agreement, and belonging. Asking someone to pause and evaluate the accuracy of a post requires deliberate, effortful thought. When forced to choose, our brains almost always prioritize the immediate social reward over the delayed satisfaction of being factually correct.
You see, our psychology fundamentally hasn't changed, but the architecture around us has completely transformed. We're operating with primitive mental shortcuts that were designed to make us efficient in small, tight-knit social groups. But now, we're using them inside a massive global information environment they were just never built to handle. Now, research on accuracy nudges does offer a small ray of hope, proving that tiny interventions prompting people to just pause and think before sharing can measurably improve the quality of what gets passed around. But it turns out, at baseline, our mental hardware is fundamentally malfunctioning in the modern network.
Speaking of modern networks and crowds, let's look at one of the most counterintuitive findings in all of social psychology. Imagine someone is in danger in public. Common sense tells us that more witnesses should equal more help, right? But controlled experiments over the last 60 years prove the exact opposite. Science proves that more witnesses actually equals less help. The more people present when someone is in danger, the less likely any single individual is to step in. This is known as the bystander effect, and the mechanism behind it is called the diffusion of responsibility. It's the psychological phenomenon where every single person in a crowd looks around and just assumes someone else will take action. And because everyone assumes someone else will do it, nobody does. The exact same crowd of people that would immediately rush to help a friend if they were in private will stand completely frozen in public, each person quietly waiting for someone else to make the first move. Let's move to and see how this builds into real-world solutions. Because what makes social psychology so fascinating is that its findings are invisible in the moment. I mean, nobody thinks they're conforming while they're actually conforming, but they become incredibly obvious in hindsight. And recognizing these hidden rules has enormous practical reach. It dictates how courtrooms carefully select juries to avoid groupthink. It teaches hospitals how to design systems that reduce fatal medical errors caused by obedience to authority. And it guides public health campaigns to actually change human behavior in ways that individual-focused approaches completely miss.
Which brings us to our final thought. Understanding human behavior at this level isn't just a neat trick for figuring out why other people do strange things. It is the absolute key to explaining why you do. You are fundamentally human. You are subject to the exact same invisible forces, cognitive biases, and situational pressures as everyone else. It's deeply unsettling, for sure, but it's also incredibly empowering. So recognizing that your conscious mind is often just playing catch-up, how will you navigate a world where you are subject to these hidden rules? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll leave you to think on that.